All right. Hi, boys and girls. I'm going to be reading chapter 28 through 30 from the Wishmakers. So hopefully you're reading along. All right, chapter 28. We go to the Lake Michigan by 7:30 in the evening. I think we must have set cross-country speed records, sustaining ourselves on peanut butter sandwiches and stopping only occasionally to stretch our legs. Thankfully, my medieval helmet has disappeared during the drive. I think we are all feeling a bit optimistic about the third task. Wow, Ridge said as the four of us stood staring out over one of the Great Lakes. Yeah, this is a big lake. I couldn't help but state the obvious. The only lake I knew was a community fishing pond just outside of town. It was a puddle in comparison. I squinted across the horizon of water. There were plenty of boats out, but none was close enough to identify a yellow flag. Tina turned to Vale. I wish to know which boat is red with a yellow flag. I felt like Tina had a seemly determination after our conversation. If you want to identify the boat, said Vale, then every time you hear the radio playing, it will turn to static. What about the downloaded music? Tina asked. Nope, replied Vale, just the radio. How long will it last? You'll have the static radio forever. Tina took a deep breath, her face scrunched up in thought. Okay, it's all about streaming anyway. Bazang! I saw her hourglass watch close as Tina raised her arm to point across the water. That's the one. Which one? I asked. From my perspective, she was pointing aimlessly into the distance. I've got it figured out, Tina assured me. We just need a way to get out there so I can give directions. Better you than me, I said. I can't read and I don't know left from right. Well, we'll need a boat, Tina continued, pointing toward a nearby marina. It would be awfully convenient to borrow one without having to wish for it. As the four of us drew closer, we realized that the docks were nearly empty. Only the single boat was lashed in place, and standing next to it were two despicable characters that I immediately recognized. Thackeray and Jathan. I think that's how you pronounce it, Jathan. Ahoy, ye scallywags! Thackeray Anderson shouted as we made a hasty approach. I be commandeering this here vessel. His pirate accent was actually quite fitting for our current situation, although I doubt historically there were pirates in Lake Michigan, or motorboats. Jathan stepped into the boat, taking his place at the controls as Thackeray struggled with the lashing rope. I was the first to reach them, drawing to a halt when I was an arm's length away. I scowled at Thackeray in the evening light. The man's hair was stringy and damp. The black strands laid across his forehead like worms stretched out on the sidewalk after a rainstorm. His face seemed hollow and long, his chin ending in a cleft full of whiskers. He was rather pale, except for his ear, which looked puffy and red. Give us the boat, I said. Behind me, I felt Ridge shrieking nervously. I tensed, preparing to transform my genie, though I wondered if he would be any braver in shark form. A cowardly shark would be just what I needed. Thackeray looked me in the eye, his face cracking into a smirk that exposed jaggedy gray teeth. When he spoke, his breath smelled like garlic. You must be the Ace of Hearts. I felt my body begin to tremble, and I swallowed the lump in my throat. Me son told me all about ya, Thackeray went on. Poor little Ace. A story with no beginning. My teeth were grinding together in an attempt to hold back my fury. Then I thought, why hold back? This was as good a chance as any to complete my quest. I lunged at Thackeray. He took an agile step backward and dropped something to the dock. It made the unmistakable ping of a coin, and I glanced down to see it was a nickel. The second before I hit him, Thackeray's foot came down on the coin, and a column of silvery light erupted around him. I hit the wall of light with a jolt that made me think I'd be electrocuted. The contact sent me reeling backward to collide with Ridge. Hardy, hardy, har, Thackeray taunted, still encased in the column of protection with his foot on the coin. Ye shan't be completing your quest today, lad. How'd he do that? Ridge muttered, propping me up as I glanced to Tina and Vale for support. But after that show of force, neither of them seemed anxious to take a swing at Thackeray. "'Tis called a trinket," Thackeray said. "Actually, it's called the coin," I corrected. I didn't know why his magical powers. I didn't know why his had magical powers, but at least he would call it by the right name. "A trinket," Vale said, "is a different kind of pay-as-you-go, pay-as-you-play wish, like Ridge's shark form," I asked. "Like Ridge's shark form?" I asked. "The wishmaker can wish for the trinket to have a special power whenever it's used," she explained. "They just have to agree up front that they'll pay the consequence every time someone uses it." "Why am I just hearing about this now?" I cried. "It's day 5. Vale shrugged defensively. "I'm not your genie." I glanced at Ridge, who mouthed the word, "Sorry." "How can he use a trinket?" I asked, pointing back at Thackeray. "He's not even a wishmaker." "Hi," Thackeray said. "Trinkets can be mighty handy, and they be available for any scurvy sea dog to use, not just wishmakers. I have only to put me foot upon here nickel, and the universe shields me from danger." "But you had to pay a consequence," I said, hoping there was some fairness in the universe. "Nay," answered Thackeray. "The wishmaker pays the price." He pointed back to the motorboat. "And I gets the reward for free." My eyes followed his gesture to the motorboat, where Jathan stood at the prow. The boy was slapping himself in the face over and over again. Even from the distance, I could see that his cheeks were bright red as his flat palms smacked one cheek, then the other, at a steady pace. I turned back to Thackeray, my opinion of the man dropping even lower, if that was possible. "You're a monster," I said through clenched teeth. I couldn't be anything else," he answered. Thackeray stepped off the nickel, bending to scoop it up as he leaped into the motorboat, the mooring rope falling to the dock. "Onward to sea, boy!" Thackeray shouted at his son. "Let the devil genie out of the jar. 'Tis time to take a wee dive." Jathan breathed heavily and, grimacing, grabbed the motorboat's wheel with a spray of water across the docks. The Anderthun pair sped away. "We've got to go after them," Ridge shouted. I saw Tina scanning the empty marina, muttering, "We need a boat." "Or do we?" I asked. A grin spread across my face as a plan came to mind. I stooped to pick up a coil of rope on the dock. "Ready?" I asked Ridge. "For what?" he asked. I said, as the genie transformed into a shark. I flopped onto my stomach on the wooden dock. "We can tie ourselves to Ridge," I explained with my face on the planks. "He can swim out of the red boat so we can make the dive." "There's just one problem," Shark Ridge said. "I can't swim." "Of course you can," I encouraged. "You're a great white shark." You wished for an air shark?" Ridge said. "So that's what the universe gave you. If I go underwater, I'll drown." "Seriously?" I blew out a frustrated sigh. "It might still work," Tina said. "We can tie the rope to his tail and hold on to it. Ridge can just fly above the water and tow us along behind him." "Let's do it," I said. "Is that okay with you, Ridge?" The genie shrugged with his fins. "Long as you think I'm strong enough." "Definitely," I said. Tina stepped forward and looped the rope around Ridge's tail. Then she offered me the other end while she turned to Vale, lip balm jar in hand. "The fewer people Ridge has to tow, the easier it will be." Vale nodded, though her expression made it clear that she didn't love the idea of spending time in a jar either. "Vale," Tina ordered, "get into the jar." The red-headed genie disappeared in a puff of smoke, and Tina slipped the little glass jar back into her pocket, making sure it was secure. I grabbed hold of the rope, Tina's hand just above mine. Ridge tried to glance behind him, but it turns out it's rather difficult for a shark to do. "Don't let go of the rope, Ace," I heard him say. "We could both drown if we snapped that tether in the middle of the lake." I was about to say, "Good point, Ridge," when the air shark lurched forward, dragging me and Tina off the end of the dock. The water felt cold as we plunged into it, face first. I gasped, kicking my feet and trying to keep my head up against the pull of my belly being drawn downward. "You'd better pick up speed," Tina said to Ridge, "or your wishmaker is going to sink like a stone." Ridge sped forward, and I felt the rope go tight in my hands. It almost slipped through my grasp. but I managed to hang on. Tina's body slammed against mine as we both dangled from the end of the rope. You've seen a person water skiing, right? That's what we looked like, except instead of a boat pulling us along, we had an airborne shark skimming through the lake's surface. And of course, we didn't have skis. Instead of our bodies skipped painfully along behind the rope. So I guess we actually looked nothing like a person water skiing. To the left, Tina shouted. I didn't know how she could see anything in that spray of water. Ridge corrected his course. To the side, though, I wasn't sure it was actually left or right. And here's a little sketch. You know, sometimes in a chapter book, they have a little sketch sometimes. Not a lot of pictures, but it helps you visualize, because you should visualize while you're reading. After a while, my entire body felt like one big welt, and I was surprised there was any water left in the lake because I could have sworn I'd swallowed it all. Tina called a few more directions to Ridge, and then finally he began to slow down. I started pumping my arms and legs, doing a strange variation of dog paddle to keep myself afloat. Hey, Ridge, I called. Can you swim? He clucked his tongue at me. Of course I know how to swim, Ace. Mum, I said. There was a loud splash as Ridge fell into the lake. At the same time, I was finally able to get my legs beneath me and found it was much easier to tread water that way. Ahead of me, Ridge seemed to have quite a bit of difficulty swimming. He floundered with his arms, head bobbing in and out of the water. I thought you said you knew how to swim, I said. I do, answered Ridge as he thrashed. It's just really hard when you have a rope tied around your ankles. My bad, I called as I swam over to him. Let me help you. But Ridge finally seemed to have gained control. I got it, he said. My shark tail is a lot bigger than my ankles. I just had to kick the rope loose. Hey, there's the boat, I said, finally spying the red vessel with the yellow flag floating just a few yards ahead. There was no sign of the Anderthans. Had they already completed the third task? That's why I stopped, Ridge said. Looks like there's a fisherman on board. I squinted at the figure of the boat, who seemed to be squinting back at us. I see you swimming there, the angler called. That's when I realized it was actually a woman, a fisherwoman with a thick brown beard, and there was something off about her, besides the beard, like the man with the pink mustache. She somehow seemed artificial. Diving is not allowed here, the burly woman pulled back her arm and cast with a stout fishing pole. Have you ever been fishing? All you have to do is put a little worm on a little hook, toss it into the lake, and wait for the fish to bite. Except this wasn't a little hook. The one that she cast was closer to the size of an anchor, and the worm on that hook was the most gigantic creature I'd ever seen. It looked more like a python. The oversized hook and monstrous worm splashed between it, Tina and me, rocking us back with the waves as it sank below the surface. Hey, Ridge, screamed at the fisherwoman. That could have hit us. I think that was the point, Tina muttered. She must be guarding the bottom of the lake, I said. We better start diving. This lake is deep, Ace, said Tina. I heard Vale's muffled voice from inside her lip balm jar. 287 feet. 287 feet? Way deeper than I thought. How'd you know? I read it on a sign at the marina, Vale's voice answered. Of course she did. One thing for sure, I'd need a wish to dive that deep. I had a hard enough time reaching the bottom of the deep end at the public pool. Aboard the red boat, the large fisherwoman was preparing a cast with another sturdy pole. Ridge, I said, thinking about how I could complete the third task without making a direct wish for it. I wish I could hold my breath for a next hour. I didn't know how long it would take for me to swim down 287 feet and back up again, but an hour seemed like long enough. So, if you want to hold your breath for the next hour, said Ridge, then every time you walk directly under a light bulb, it will explode. Whoa, I said. That seems kind of dangerous. Won't broken glass fall down on my head? Not if you move out of the way, said Ridge. Besides, you can always weave around them so they don't explode. I'll always be looking up at the ceiling, I said. What if I get a stiff neck? Definitely don't look up, Ridge said. Broken glass could fall into your eye. So how do I weave around the light bulbs if I can't look up to see where they are? Ridge pointed to my hourglass. You'll have to work that out later. Besides, this will only last the rest of the week. Fine, I muttered. Bazang! Sure, exploding light bulbs meant I'd be spending some time in the dark, but if accepting the consequence allowed me to keep up with Thackeray, then don't you think it was worth it? I turned to Tina, treading water beside me. Did you wish for air? In response, Tina held up her little genie jar. I didn't have to wish. Vale had enough air for both of us inside the jar. When I need to take a breath, I can put my mouth to it and breathe some of the air inside. Seriously? I shouted. That's going to work? I suddenly felt as though I'd be destroying light bulbs for nothing. I hadn't thought about air inside the peanut butter jar. Tina drew in a deep breath and ducked under the water's surface. I reached around and unzipped my soggy backpack. Oh, come on, Ridge. You're going to jar me? I didn't wish for you to be able to hold your breath, I pointed out, and if the lake is really as deep as Vale said, then you'll have to come down with me. Ridge nodded in understanding, and I quickly muttered, Ridge, get into the jar. Poof! He disappeared, and down we went. Chapter 29. Tina was already swimming downward. I saw her maybe 10 feet below, lifting Vale's genie jar to her mouth and taking a fresh breath of air. She might have been smart enough to come up with that trick, but my method seemed more foolproof. I was holding my breath and I felt perfectly fine. I could do this for an hour. That had to be a world record. The water beneath us looked dark and foreboding, but things were going swimmingly. And then I got hooked. I was diving peacefully when my shoulder brushed past a cord of invisible fishing line. I ducked sideways through the water just as the huge hook passed me by. I thought I had successfully escaped when a massive worm suddenly lashed out like a sea serpent, winding its slimy body around my arm. There was a sharp tug, and then I felt myself being reeled upward. Since I was holding my breath, there was no possible way to get Ridge out of the jar to make a wish. Even if I could get him out, I knew talking underwater would most likely sound like gurgle, 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 glub, blub. I punched the nasty worm, but if you've tried underwater punching, you know that's not very effective. I tried going limp, playing dead with the hope that I could slip through his grasp. While I was in this placid state, I saw Tina off to my left, or maybe to my right. She appeared to be having some trouble of her own. Another hook and worm had found her too. She was wriggling like a fish, desperate to get free, but her demon worm had managed to wrap itself tightly around one ankle. At last, I broke the water's surface. The bearded fisherwoman was leaning against the railing of the red boat, straining against the bent pole. It's a good one, she shouted. Look at the size of him. Ridge, I shouted as the fisherwoman eased me closer to the boat. Get out of the jar! The genie appeared in the water beside me, floundering for a moment as he realized where he was. What happened? He cried. What does it look like? I shouted. I need you to us out of this mess. At the mention of the trigger word, I rolled stomach down to the water, giving up my last bit of resistance against the worm and the fisherwoman. At the same time, Ridge became a shark and shot through the air, his razor teeth snapping the line that was pulling me in. The fisherwoman stumbled backward, slipping on the deck of the boat, and as soon as the line was severed, the worm that had held my arm seemed to dry up and unravel, sinking with the massive hook to the bottom of the lake. The bearded woman recovered quickly, grabbing another fishing pole from a mount on the rail. Fish on, she cried, reeling hard. A second later, Tina broke the surface of the lake, gasping for air. Ridge, I shouted, struggling to swim while face down. Cut her loose! The air shark genie spun around, biting through the line that held Tina captive. Are you out of your mind? Tina shouted at the burly fisherwoman. I am a guardian of the ancient consequence. I have been placed here to catch my limit, the woman replied. Whatever pain my hooks cause you will be nothing in comparison to what you will find in the cave of the undiscovered genie. It was another warning, still similar to what we'd heard at Mount Rushmore and Superfun Happy Place. I wanted to ask her for more details, but she looked to be prepping another fishing pole. I don't think she's going to stop, I shouted to Ridge and Tina. Vale's voice echoed out of the jar in Tina's hand. Let me out of here! I can help! Yep, Shark Ridge said. She's itching. We're going to need something to cut the lines if we get caught again, I said to Tina. If only my shark could swim. I wish for a knife. Ridge turned to me, his shark mouth opened wide to explain the consequence. If you want a knife, he said, then anytime you sneeze this week, a grape will fall out of your nose. What? I cried. I don't have grapes up my nose. I know, said Ridge, but the universe will cause one to fall out whenever you sneeze. Would it be a red grape or a green grape? I asked. Does it matter? Tina cried, ducking at the fisherwoman. As the fisherwoman cast a giant hook and worm. It might, I said. Green grape, answered Ridge, the sour kind. That's gross, I said. Bazang! I felt something land in the back pocket of my pants. Since my pants were on backwards, it was really the front pocket. Floating on my stomach in the water, I reached down and retrieved the item I had wished for. What's this? I cried, holding it up. It was the smallest knife I had ever seen, like the kind my foster mother used to cut olives. The blade was probably less than 2 inches long. Why is it so small? You didn't mention the size, Ridge said. That's what the universe gave you. Not cool, universe, I muttered. It better be sharp enough to cut the fishing line. Let's dive down and find out, Tina said. Aren't you wishing for something? I asked her, wondering if she'd come up with some other brilliant plan to avoid getting hooked by the evil worms. We'll stick together, she said. You can cut me loose with your knife. I glared at her, feeling like she'd just used me. That's a dirty trick. Tina shrugged. It's not a trick, she insisted. I don't see why I should make a wish when you already have a perfectly good knife that would work for both of us. It's 2 inches long, I shouted. We didn't really have time to debate. Every second wasted meant Thackeray was closer getting away. Mama, I said. The shark turned into a boy, who fell into the water with a splash, and I said, Ridge, get into the jar. A puff of smoke. Ridge disappeared, and I was able to float upright again. Tina swam over to me, but I dove underwater before she could say anything. If she wanted my help with the knife, she'd have to keep up. Okay, and here's a little sketch. There's that giant worm. I darted straight down. Now that I knew what to look out for, I could see a few fishing lines nearly invisible in the darkening water. One was close enough that I decided to test out my new knife. Sliding the tiny blade along the clear line, I felt the knife snap through, successfully severing the hook somewhere below. Suddenly, an overgrown worm on a different hook whizzed past my head, leaving a trail of bubbles. I managed to dodge the reaching bait, but Tina wasn't so lucky. It took her around the middle, snugging her tightly against the huge hook. She was jerked upward, but I was there to cut her loose before she got far. Tina took a breath of air from her lip balm jar and gave me a grateful look as she swam on. I cut through two more lines that brushed threateningly close, and once a beastly worm managed to wrap around my leg, but the knife, despite its miniature size, seemed to be sufficient defense against it. I estimated we've dived about 100 feet when the fishing net got us. It was so dark, I didn't see it until it wrapped around me. Tina was snagged up too, and we collided underwater as the net tightened its grip. I used my little knife in hopes of slashing my way free, but the net was made of thick strands, and I barely managed to get through the one as we were dragged upward. Tina kicked and thrashed, but that didn't help at all. By the time we reached the surface of the lake again, my arms and legs were twisted and tangled in the net. What a haul! Cried the fisherwoman. Bring them in! Bring them in! Ridge, get out of the jar! And the genie suddenly appeared and instantly taking the form of a shark. I went belly down, but there was a bigger problem. Ridge was inside the net. My shark thrashed, but this only seemed to delight the fisherwoman even more. Can't you bite free? I yelled. This is a fishing net, he answered. So I'm a fish, said Ridge. This is designed to catch me. Well, that turned out horribly. Tina gasped as the bearded woman raked us toward the boat. How did Thackeray get past this? I cried, slapping the surface of the water. I had to assume he'd already accomplished the third task, and he and Jathan would probably still be nearby. Jathan must have wished for his dad to reach the bottom, Tina said. Nothing can stop the universe from fulfilling that kind of direct wish. Fine, I yelled. I wish to touch the bottom of Lake Michigan. At saying the state name, the universe made me do my best jump. But jumping is hard when you're floating on your stomach in a fishing net with a shark on top of you. Okay, said Shark Ridge. If you want to touch the bottom, then your breath will smell like fish until forever, I cringed. What kind of fish? Are you talking salmon? Tuna? Halibut? Ridge shrugged with his front fins. Just general fishiness. Is there anything I could do to mask it? I asked. What if I brush my teeth? Not going to help, said Ridge. Ridge said. Besides, a few days ago, you took a consequence that makes your toothpaste taste like cauliflower. I had forgotten about the toothpaste, even though it wouldn't last. I had to complete the third task so I could catch up to Thackeray Anderson. That took priority over fresh breath. Bazang! I said. Suddenly, the net disentangled itself from me, and I was able to swim free. Now that I made the direct wish to reach the bottom, the universe would have to remove all obstacles from the path to fulfill my wish. That wish. I transformed Ridge and called back into the jar, turning once more to Tina, who was still struggling inside the fishing net. You're on your own this time. Tina couldn't mooch off my wish list like she had done with the knife. Vale, she called. Get out of the jar! The red-headed genie suddenly appeared in the net, getting soaked for the first time and gasping at the shock of the cold water. I wish to touch the bottom of Lake Michigan, said Tina, causing me to jump at the name. Same wish as Ace? Vale said. I could hear you from the jar, you know. Tina shrugged. We have to hurry. Being direct is the only way. Vale nodded. It's the same consequence. The fish breath. The fish breath? Tina asked. Vale nodded. Bazang! The only reason I had stuck around to watch the exchange was because I needed a little bit of satisfaction in seeing Tina accept the same consequence that I had agreed to. Once I had received the reward of seeing her scowl, I took a deep breath of fishy air and dove down. The fishing lines were still there, slicing through the water with great giant hooks and demon worms, but they seemed to miss us. Twice a fishing net pulled past us, but our wish had given us the assurance that we'd reach the bottom. Nothing could hold us back now. It grew darker as we swam deeper. The pressure of the water was building around me, and I thought my head might explode. I shut my eyes and continued diving, my fingers reaching out blindly before me. I was seriously considering giving up and turning back, when at last my hand plunged into a soft layer of silt that made up the lake bottom. I couldn't see Tina in the darkness, but I had to trust that she was close behind. I ran my hand through the muddy lake bed, a few small slimy rocks slipping through my fingers. I had completed the third task, taking me one step closer to receiving the key to enter the cave of the undiscovered genie. I didn't know how much time I was left in my hour of breath, but it seemed like a good idea to get to the surface so I'd be ready to breathe air again. Kicking off the bottom of the lake, I streamed upward, finding this direction much easier than the dive. When my head finally rose above the surface of the lake, the sun had just set and the cool wind whipped over the water. I had come up 20 or 30 yards from the red boat. In the dying light, I could see the bearded fisherwoman leaning against the railing. Tina came up behind me, gasping and sputtering. Did you touch the bottom? She asked. I nodded as the fisherwoman's voice sounded across the water. You have completed the third task, she called. But before you seek the cave of the undiscovered genie, I must warn you. He longs to breathe the free air, but his powers are fishy. Ridge, I said, get out of the jar. I just wanted to be prepared if the guardian fisherwoman tried anything else. But just as Ridge appeared in a puff of smoke, the bearded woman slumped down on the deck of the red boat, and though suddenly, fast asleep. Did you hear what she said? Ridge asked. Yeah, more ominous warnings about the undiscovered genie, more inceptive to stop Thackeray from opening his jar. Tina swam closer to me, still gasping for breath from her long time underwater. I turned my face away from her. I'd offer you a breath mint, I said. but it wouldn't help. And I didn't actually have one. Tina splashed water in my face. Mind your own consequences, she said. You smell just like I do. I couldn't help but laugh, and laughing should have made my socks wet. But guess what? There already were. Ha! Take that, universe. Hope you're enjoying. Hope you're reading along.